a more science-based approach to their setting of commitments and following up on those pledges that they are coming with. Secondly, they need to embark on much more deep decarbonization efforts, and not just take the low-hanging fruits, but also go there where it's tough and where it might have implications for some years on the bottom line and on the top line. Thirdly, revise their supply chain towards a circular, no-waste approach. And that's clear when you see the pressure, especially from civil society and consumers towards business. Financial institutions, there are enough money in this world when you look at it in totality to solve the Paris Agreement, and also I believe most of biodiversity, although that's a very new field to get a grasp on. But they are just not being used. So when you look at, for example, the transition to clean energy, currently, annually in 2015 figures, around 340 billion US dollars is spent a year. To get to a 2% degree scenario, according to the Paris Agreement, you need to multiply by 4 those investments, and to reach 1.5 degrees global warming, you need to 6-double that spending of 340 billion US dollars a year. So it's quite a drastic change, quite a drastic transition in terms of financial allocations needed. And that capital that needs to be unleashed from a variety of financial sources, not just pension funds, but also sovereign wealth funds, banks, individuals, etc. We need a lot of different kinds of financing for the green transition. Investors, they need to make strong financial commitments to invest in the green economy, and hopefully we'll see more of those commitments across the board. But it's also a matter of getting the necessary changes in the national regulations. Like in Denmark, we have a regulation that is fruitful for investing in the green economy, but so should other countries also have. And finally, institutional investors, they need to put pressure on their direct investments for the companies that they invest in, that they are aligned with the Paris Agreement. International organizations, and Geert also mentioned that I think will have a very special role in the future as kind of the new global agents for distributing best practice and knowledge in this field, in scaling green solutions. I'm talking about organizations like United Nations, of course, IRENA, C40, OECD, GGGI, Center for Arab Towns. There are many organizations that will have a strong role in the future in this field. What is required is a stronger focus on them towards the users, more towards their donors, etc. But having this kind of also a strong customer-centric point of view. I said in the beginning that I would like to give some examples that also had its start in Denmark, and where we've been partially involved in some of it. I think if you start at the very at the specific level in terms of project partnerships, public-private partnership have become a popular term when developing green economy projects. One of the most successful ways and models of expanding into renewable energy, solar and wind, is the use of long-term power purchase agreements to attract institutional capital. In a way, it is rather than taking a product and then finding capital, it's going the other way around. You figure out what are the requirements for certain types of capital to be spent, and then you construct the product accordingly. So that, I think, is one of the by far the key specific reasons to the fact that we've had so much growth in scaling wind and solar parks. A second example is the use of blended finance, public-private finance of projects in emerging markets to reduce risks. In Denmark, we have something called the Climate Investment Fund. We also have an SDG fund that exactly uses those blended models, where the public finance goes in and takes some of the first risk and also some, of course, the first loss if that happens. I think that's very important for the quite conservative capital to move to new markets where most of the green growth will happen. Finally, we need more. A good example is grant financing to increase capacity and project development. When you look at partnerships at the project level, what is needed the most is actually the deal flow, the number of projects out there. That's in most demand. A second example, if you move up to the industry level, is industry partnerships. And just recently, the new government in Denmark launched 13 national climate partnerships in collaboration with key industry associations in terms of adopting a new national climate law. Those industries include heavy industries, service and IT, retail, airlines, land transport, energy, life sciences, production, building and construction, finance, food, water, waste, and trade. So you can see it's very encompassing partnerships across the full board of business. And it's a way of engaging the private sector and helping to reduce Denmark's CO2 emissions by 70% in 2030 from the 1990 level. And I think we will see a lot of these partnerships appear also internationally. You could see it at the UN Climate Action Summit, where there's a strong focus on new coalitions and alliances to have the public and the private sector to collaborate on developing targets and new means. Thanks. The third type of partnership I'd like to mention is one that we have worked on a lot for the last 2 years, and it is a joint announcement in New York of what I mentioned before, this Prime Minister's toolbox for developing adequate country frameworks for investing in clean energy, a new 50 billion commitment from the Danish pension funds to invest in clean energy projects from 2020 to 2030, and that's not just in Denmark, it's also overseas. So the Danish pension funds are active today through various vehicles in Northern Europe, in the US, in Taiwan, in Africa, in Kenya, etc. So they are moving out. And actually, you can see the picture up there is the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, with a number of pension funds CEOs at the announcement. And actually, we are continuing this climate investment coalition also to go international, and hope to be able to announce even more green investment funding when the COP is in Glasgow next year. I was told I have just a few minutes, so it's good that I'm reaching the conclusion now. So in totality, transition to the clean economy, there's a lot of talk, but it's happening at a pace that is much too slow. And to increase the transition, we need more concerted global efforts on regulatory change, so governments adopt the correct and suitable frameworks for the green economy. We need increased commitments from private investors to invest in the green economy. Much more focus from business on innovation and technology across sectors, and international organizations to focus on scaling best practice globally. And just at the close, a little bit about World Climate Limited. We have existed since 2010. We say that we have a probably maybe the strongest network of decision makers in the world for accelerating the clean economy. We have developed a number of leading green hubs and platforms around the world. We've done it in Denmark, we've done it for Dubai from 2014 to 2016. We're doing it now for Massachusetts and New York State and other places. We've worked for key governments, business and financial institutions also across the globe. And of course working and focusing very much on these industry and sector partnerships nationally and globally. With this, I want to say thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure speaking for you. Thank you.
Jan, thank you very much for that. Next to the platform, or to speak for us this morning, is, I must apologise if I get any of these names wrong, so do apologise. Dr. Amin Daha. Dr. Amin Daha is the CTO, Chief Technical Officer at the Global Environmental Management Services. His specialty in technology, development, design, engineering, construction and plant operation in the waste management industry, environmental protection, mineral processing industry. He has also developed strategy solutions for integrated waste management, IWM, providing historic operating solutions in industrials from technical, management, financial perspective and using sustainable based planning. Oh, apologies. Sorry about that. It's the way it was written out for me. That's my excuse. We're going to have Gopa. Gopa is Managing Director of APAC and Middle East. Gopa manages business and market development of lead and other GBCI rating systems for Asia, Pacific, Middle East regions. His expert includes, he's an engineer with an MBA in marketing and finance. His expertise includes corporate strategy, international marketing, and expansion branding and business unit creation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be here. First of all, let me thank the Royal Commission of Jubair and Yanbu, Dr. Mohammed Al-Anizi, as well as the Environmental Center for Arab Towns for creating this particular platform where we can actually exchange notes and network as well. So let me try to take off from possibly where Dr. Jord in the morning and Mr. Jans Nielsen actually set a context. So my name is Gopal and I represent US Green Building Council and GBCI for the Asia Pacific and Middle East markets. So quick disclaimer, I think one of the speakers in the beginning talked about Trump. So although we are based out of Washington DC, but we do not subscribe to the views of Trump on the climate changes. So we as an organization, we finished 25 years last year. So what I'm trying to possibly take for the next 20 minutes is to address, I think, some of the questions which were posed by the keynote speakers before me, and also talk about what should be the future of the green economy, at least from our perspective, which is drawn from our experience in the last 25 years. So LEAD is a flagship brand which we introduced 25 years back. For those of you who are not aware about this brand, so LEAD stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, basically founded on 5 parameters of energy, water, waste, human experience, and carbon footprint. And over the last 25 years, I think these are some of the words which actually have been addressed through buildings, whether it is commercial, residential, whether it is retail malls, whether it is data centers, whether it is metro stations, airports, seaports across the world. So we work in 175 countries and territories. We work with close to 90,000 projects, close to 90 billion square feet. And I also chanced to read upon the Vision 2030 document of the Saudi government. So a lot of things what they address is actually pretty topical to what we're going to talk now. And I also saw that there is a lot of consonance between the vision as well as SDGs, which we as LEAD also have addressed over the last 25 years. So let me just take a context of Saudi before I get on to other things. So Saudi Arabia as a country, I think, has done very well on green. Taking from our experience, we work with close to 1,250 projects across the kingdom, and so close to 245 million square feet work with us, and that's pretty creditable. So let us come to what the future holds for the green economy. So what we did was to change. Somebody talked about the paradigm shift today morning. That's exactly what we're looking at. So while you're working with LEAD, but we also ensured that there were other solutions or let's say standards which can actually go beyond buildings. And I'm not going to go into everything in detail, but I think as I go through the presentation, I will draw upon certain of these products and try to connect to what we are going to discuss. So somebody talked about technology in the morning. So this is exactly what we did. So the fourth industrial revolution or the Internet of Things, as we talk about. So we were practically clear that being a leader in sustainability, one needs to talk about data. So what we did 2 years back was to launch this IoT platform on the cloud. Now what it does is that it can be any space. It can be any type of building where we first tell the developer or the owner, first start tracking your data, right? So there's enough data in your buildings on water and energy and air quality, your PM 2.5, your volatile organic compounds. So all the data can actually come into this platform, and you can actually get a real-time green score of the building, right? That's the first step. Second is you take then incremental steps to improve that number. And then it follows very much across the life cycle of your building. So that's one shift which we did a couple of years back. And with that today, leaders across the world, they are today able to start managing their portfolio, right? So if I'm let's say a large developer, or if I'm a hotel operator like a Marriott, now I have thousands of properties across the world. Now using this platform, I can first track data. I can start benchmarking, right? So let's say an asset number 1 is doing very well on water. So what is it that they are doing which an asset number 10 can use and improve the scores? So it's not about certification. It's not about LEED. So that's one thing which I want to clarify. This platform is agnostic to rating. So any building typology can actually get into it. You can use data, which obviously, data is the new leadership. It's a transparent way of assessing things as well. That's one step which I believe the green economy has to go in the future. The second is we also started publishing various analytics as well, right? So today people are talking about big data. So we talk about energy per square feet, water per individual. You're talking about carbon scores. So all this can be taken through this platform, and you can actually set your KPIs for your different teams, right? So it can be a project team, a design team, it can be a utility team, even at a CXO level for a balanced scorecard, you can actually start fixing sustainability targets. So that's one dramatic shift we did. We obviously extended our sustainability into residential as well, which is going to be possibly the driver in the next few years. Most importantly, we believe that we need to go beyond building. So we launched a new program called LEAD for Cities and Communities, again a year back. So this actually dramatically shifts the focus, right? So buildings are fine, but if we have to do that paradigm shift, if we have to do that multiplier effect, then you need to bring in cities and communities, right? I think today morning I was pleasantly surprised to, this is my first visit to Yanbu. So when I actually traveled from the hotel to the center, I was taken aback with the greenery, right? So it actually proves how an industrial city can also be green. So for cities like Yanbu or Jubail or whatever it is, right? So these cities can now use our programs and talk about how they can benchmark against the best in the world. So again, this particular program is closely aligned with the global goals, the SDGs of the UN. More importantly, again, the cities will use the data only, right? So we are not talking about documentation and abstract thing. We are today inviting cities to share the data with us so that we are able to give them a score and they can now look at how they can improve in the years to come. Again, very clearly, it is rooted in the triple bottom line. We are very clear about it, the planet profits. And again, I'm not getting into too much of detail, but I just thought I'll share this frame with you because when you talk about sustainable cities, it goes beyond buildings. So somebody talked about social equity in the morning. It has to be inclusive. There's a term called Gini coefficient of income. So our program today includes all that, right? It's not about just the energy and water. It's about a human experience where the citizens are actually tracked, right? So about everything, accessible to possibly affordable housing, accessibility to education. So it goes on and on. We today are working with 140 projects, and in fact, Dubai city became the first certified LEED city in Middle East. So while we have cities across the globe, Dubai became the first one. And very interestingly, a lot of cities in Saudi are also talking to us, and we hope to announce possibly a LEED certified city very, very soon. And again, it can be applied to a new city or an existing city. So, for example, Yanbu is an existing city. They can apply for the program and understand where they are and take steps to become a greener and sustainable city as well. Let me take the next example, right? So, I talked about, buildings for some time. So what we did a couple of years back is that we realized that whatever materials are going into a construction of a building on a city, why don't we actually look at them as well? Because, supply chain also has to go green. I think somebody mentioned that in the morning again. I'm just taking from that perspective. So what we did was to launch a program where materials which are used for construction, so it can be a cement, it can be an insulation, a glazing, whatever it is. So we started asking the manufacturers, now, in the manufacturing of glazing or carpets or whatever it is, please start sharing with us the energy, water, and the waste impact you do in your manufacturing. So we started asking for that. So today, if you're talking about a green building or a city, any particular materials which are used where they are able to showcase environmental product declaration and health product declaration. So these are two new terminologies. So environmental product declaration is about a product which has been manufactured where they have actually given a lower carbon footprint, right? So it can be lower energy usage in the manufacturing, lower water usage, or it is not putting stress on the waste, etc. So if these are being proven, they get an environmental product declaration. So which means they will get more points in LEED as well. Similarly, what is HPD? Health product declaration. So I'll be using a carpet or a paint, inside a building. Now, they emit volatile organic compounds, right? So if the materials are able to prove that they have a low HPD, they get more points from us. So with these two steps, we have today made sure that the supply chain also goes green. Incidentally, today, in Saudi Arabia, a lot of subsidiaries of Aramco and SABIC are also working with us, whereby we are trying to understand how their materials can actually go green and not only supply to Saudi, but also to the rest of the world as well. So that's another take on the green economy, right? So we are today talking about stakeholders on the downstream as well. And today, countries which actually invest into manufacturing are now looking at investing into manufacturing where they become a manufacturing hub of green materials for the rest of the world as well. That will be a huge impact on this as well. So today we have 20,000 transparency documents of materials across the world, right? And this is no mean task. And again, no credit to us, it's a credit to the manufacturers across the world who have actually prepared EPDs and HPDs so that they're able to, the entire supply chain can go green. What is the next on sustainability? So, just to summarize, until now, we talked about technology. I talked about an example of supply chain going green. We talked about how buildings can evolve into cities, etc. The next step we have taken is to talk about LEED Zero. Now, all of us talk about net zero buildings, community cities, but we wanted to create a standard for it. So we launched a brand called LEED Zero last year. So with this particular standard, any building, any community, any city can now actually apply to, again, it takes the same technology platform, right? So it can either go zero on energy, zero on water, or zero on waste, or zero on carbon, right? So those are the four terminologies we have, which pretty much, I think, takes the entire ecosystem into what could be the end goal from a sustainability perspective. Incidentally, last week at Atlanta, in our annual conference where Barack Obama was a keynote speaker, we actually announced LEED positive as well. So that will be the next. So after LEED zero, you become positive as well, right? So a quick thing, I mean, we do researches across, the world to understand, what actually are the triggers for the green economy, right? What are the barriers to green economy? So one of the things which clearly comes back is, and this feedback has come from everybody, whether it is architects, engineers, developers, hoteliers, government. So we actually did this questionnaire, did this quantitative research across 57 countries. So one of the key drivers for the green economy is going to be about health and well-being. So let's be very clear about it, right? So we can talk endlessly about energy, water, circular economy. All that is very, very important. But ultimately, what we believe is all this has to transform into the key stakeholder who's ultimately, the person who's actually living inside an office, or, I use the word living deliberately because we spend a lot of time actually in buildings to do that. So whether people live in offices or residents or whatever it is, health and well-being is going to be the key driver. And again, we did a quick survey last year to understand about the green buildings. And obviously, it's a no-brainer that today we are very clear that people who are in green buildings seem to be happier than a non-green building. So I think the direction is right, the trajectory is right. I think we just need to move forward. And lastly, let me just talk about one aspect called education. I think, again, just to summarize, so we talked about technology, we talked about evolving buildings into communities and cities, we talked about moving towards net zero building, and then lastly, I think we will talk about capacity building. So because, today green is a very nascent, in terms of its life cycle, it is very important to actually invest into education as well. So just to quote our example, what we do is, all the 25 years of our wisdom across 175 countries, we actually roped in all the stakeholders. It's not about USGBC only. The consultants who work with us, the architects who work with us, the governments who work with us. We actually, invite everybody to share their content. And then we launched an online platform. So today, any architectural student, civil engineering student can actually go into that portal, can actually start learning and reading, right? So today we have close to 200,000 students across the world who have actually gone through that content and who also passed our exams. So that's a dramatic shift we are seeing. So today, the entire industry can then look at these professionals to make sure that the acceleration can actually happen. A very quick point. I'm just trying to draw a parallel for Saudi Arabia. So, I just looked upon the number of projects we have across the world and tried to actually, compare that to the number of professionals we have in the country. Now, if you actually see in the last slide, Saudi Arabia is literally, number 6 in the world. But take the number of professionals in Saudi, very, very low. So what we are doing for the last 2 years is to ensure that we have contacted all the universities in Saudi, right? And in fact, we are actually today already working with King Fahad and Prince Mughram, just for example, where we have actually given our curriculum to them. We have actually encouraged students to pass our exams so that they can actually become professionals as well. So lastly, again, to reiterate, I mean, the future of green economy, yes, I think we talked about technology, we talked about evolving into cities and communities, we talked about getting into net zero buildings, we talked about making sure that the capacity building happens. But ultimately, let's be very clear, all these steps have to have people as your center, right? So I think if you do that right, I think there'll be no stopping in terms of growth. I think somebody talked about a $4 trillion economy of the green thing. So, but if you add the stakeholders, if we talk about supply chain, if you talk about education, if you talk about all that, we will not be surprised if this particular segment can grow 20 to 30% across the world. So, with that, let me thank you for this opportunity, and I'm open to questions at the end of it. Yeah.
Gopal, thank you very much for that. Sorry, I've not got it right this time. Dr. Amanda Ha is the Chief Technical Officer at the Global Environmental Management Services, is a specialist in the technology development and design, engineering, construction and plant operation in the waste management, environmental protection, mineral process industry. He has also developed strategy solutions for integrated waste management, IWM, providing operating solutions for the industry from technical management to financial perspectives using sustainable-based planning.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the Royal Commission for Yambu and Jubail for organizing this conference on a topic which I think is of critical global importance. And what I'm going to focus on is more towards how we in the waste industry, recycling industry, view this opportunity to enhance the green economy. So I'll briefly cover the current status and then move on to some of the things we are doing and subsequently where the opportunities lie. Current status, I think we are all very aware of, and one of the biggest challenges we face as a society is one of consumption, and it's ever-increasing consumption. When I was growing up, for me, having a pair of shoes was a gift, and one pair of shoes would last me, a long time. Today, I look at my children, and they have multiple pairs of shoes and multiple everything. And it's because of the way the world has gone. Because it's possible, we do it. But from an environmental point of view and sustainability point of view, this type of high level of consumption can be very damaging. So the consumption is one aspect that even as industries, we have to ask our question, is this necessary? Every time we embark on a project or embark on anything, we have to ask, is this necessary? How can it be moderated? And how can it be sustainable? And you see, when you look at high consumption, the knock-on effect is in so many areas. And the waste industry is significantly impacted, both from industrial waste and municipal waste. And can't see the slide? Okay, I think we can. So, covering the point on consumption, the knock-on effect on the waste industry, and of course then, while that impacts industries and municipalities, we have to make sure that even the type of packaging, the recyclability and everything of all the consumable items we use is properly thought through. Now, some of the common environmental challenges, and I won't spend much time on it because we are all very familiar with them, But we've got issues relating to pollution, both municipal, industrial, social, and it falls in the categories of water, air, and ground pollution. So I won't spend much time on that because the sources are quite well known. And bottom line, where there is pollution, of course, where there is pollution, there is the issue of waste, and the waste industry has to cater to the rising level of pollution to provide economic and sustainable solutions. And of course, finally, the current status also impacts climate change. So what are the objectives of industries? One is to use best available technologies for recycle and resource recovery. Two is reduce the dependence on desalinated water. As it increases the salinity in the sea, it's not as sustainable because the wastewater recycle option is significantly attractive. Also, the quality of groundwater, maintaining tight air quality management, stronger participation in regulations, and a scientific and sustainable approach to data management, which I'll talk a bit more about today. Brushing on some environmental friendly technologies, and there's so many, but some of the ones that we have found very useful are, for example, in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf region as a whole, there are a lot of projects requiring cleanup of contaminated soils. And several technologies have been used, but I'd like to mention that thermal desorption and derivatives of thermal desorption have proved to be very, very effective, because the bottom line is, if you look at it from a sustainability point of view, when you're cleaning up a polluted site, if you take the traditional approach of excavation, transport, treatment, landfill, or disposal, it's a massive carbon footprint, let alone the cost. Whereas if you're able to treat it right there on site to a level where the contaminated soil can be redeposited from where you took it, then that is significantly more sustainable than most other solutions. And here in that regard, we have worked with infrared technology, and it's actually a very unique technology because you can transport these units to the site, you can do the cleanup, and the finished product can be redeposited whilst recycling the organic contaminants that you would normally consider a liability. So this is one technology to keep our eyes on. The infrared is very attractive because the transmission method of energy is radiation as opposed to simply just conduction and convection. Bioremediation is also a very well-known and accepted practice. It has minimal intervention if you do it in situ. It has lots of positive effects, but at the same time, I would say that in my experience, bioremediation has a limit to how far down you can go in terms of reaching the best possible quality of treated soil and treated sludge. Other environmentally friendly technologies circle around the water industry, and particularly in water purification, in wastewater treatment, all being driven in the direction of optimizing consumption of primary water and maximum recycle of the wastewater. And in that regard, some significant improvements have been made in advanced oxidation technologies using different types of catalysts tied together with nanotechnology. There is a number of biotechnology solutions that have grown. Membrane filtration has advanced a great deal, as has micro and ultrafiltration. And of course, UV and other disinfection solutions have also evolved significantly in their efficiency, energy consumption, and output. If we talk about technologies in the air quality, we're all familiar with the traditional bag houses. But I think the point to note is that there has been significant advances in nanofiltration. So the materials that are used in the bag houses that we're accustomed to have come a long ways in terms of their filtration efficiency and air cleaning efficiency. Likewise, ionic separation of dust particles in smoke-free towers. Wet scrubbing has also come a long way in the various options you can apply to efficiently scrub contaminated gases. And biofilters also offer, in certain applications, a very good way to handle air emissions. In Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region, wherever we have oil and petrochemical industries, we also have lagoons. And we have waters sitting in lagoons that have the potential to emit VOCs, as well as some sort of gases that do come as a result of chemical reactions that might occur in the lagoons. And there, from our experience, we have done quite a bit of development work in mist sprays, but using specialized binder materials. So these materials bind the VOCs, stabilize them from that gaseous form, and settle them down back into the liquid form. As a result, release of VOCs is controlled. You can apply oxidants through mist sprays as well. Net, maintain a clean air environment where we have large lagoons. What I'd like to talk more about today is the data management opportunities, particularly from a waste industry perspective. And we have today, if we look at the opportunity with data management, the efficient collection of data, the quality of what we are recording. I mean, that's the key. You can apply all the tech in the world, but the quality and the procedures of collecting the data, the analytical tools of actually deriving the data, all that comes together into what we call data lakes. And these data lakes are extremely useful using the new tools today available in the industry. So what's a data lake? So it's basically a centralized repository that enables storage of data that is either structured or unstructured. And it's stored in an as-is form. And this makes the data lake very useful because all kinds of new technologies that are available can be applied to manipulate and manage that data. And they enable different types of analytics from dashboards and visualizations to big data processing, real-time analytics, and machine learning. So let's look at a data lake in waste management. What sort of data do we collect? So we have, in the waste collection area, we have manifest records of the waste, digital records. We keep MSDSs of all the waste materials that we receive, significant information on waste characterization, and other data. So on the waste collection side, that part of the lake is very, very important because using new analytical tools, you can actually extrapolate backwards to the source and the generator of the waste, and we can work with them to achieve extremely significant efficiencies. Then in the transport and logistics, of course, the data lake will have your GPS data, the fuel consumption, operating timelines. Again, this can be used to optimize costs as well as carbon footprint. Once the waste arrives at a treatment facility, then you've got the lab analysis, you've got the mass balances, and you've got the emission data. Now here, there are significant opportunities to achieve great sustainability scores with this data, which I will talk about next. On the outputs, again, the same sort of information, which is an extension of the mass balance, lab analysis, landfill information, emissions, same with the recycle, and the reagent consumptions as well play a significant role in the optimizing of a waste recycle operation through the data lake route. So what are the tools we can use for the data lakes? Of course, there is ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, which many industries have already adopted. there's blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, and others. So blockchain, I'm sure you're all very much aware, but it's basically you have blocks of data that are connected together cryptographically such that they cannot be altered. So they provide a very clear, transparent record of every event, from where the reagent was made all the way to its final fate in disposal. It also provides a record and information through which governments, royal commissions, and others can reward industries as well as communities in terms of their recycling efforts. It's an excellent data recording management tool and completely transparent because it's very difficult to change. It provides safety, resistant to modification of data, transparency, permanent record, and a distributed ledger. Now, in the waste industry, what can we track? So we can track all our feed and reagent data from their points of origin. We can track our treatment process data. This is very important because when you are optimizing a treatment process in one of the reactors, in any of the reactors, you have to look at every hour that your material spends in a reactor as carbon footprint, energy, and waste, and emissions. So if through the analytics of the processing data, we were able to optimize the residence time of treatment of each different type of waste or feed source, you can achieve significant reduction in costs. We can achieve significant improvements in quality and net reduction in carbon footprint. Same philosophy applies in the output data for recycle, reuse, and how we use all our process units. And in this regard, the blockchain data can be very useful also in insurance management, liability mitigation, energy optimization, and that's a very big area of opportunity, and enhanced economic efficiencies. So blockchain provides us the record. AI analytics is also an area where we are investing quite heavily in terms of integrating this into our company and SIRC, who is our parent. And this is machine learning, which allows us to process and analyze trends in data that are very, very significant. So here, from the waste industry point of view, this machine learning will actually help us correlate the quality change of the waste from the moment it is received all the way to its final fate. It will help us correlate the quality of the waste that came in and how it came from the waste generator through their processes and how it's impacted the waste handling and management process. So with AI, you would actually be able to predict certain types of waste as providing, under certain conditions, risk of high emissions or accidents. It's an integral tool within the data lake that we can significantly improve our efficiency and our air quality. And further down the road, I'm sure even when we look at the use of AI in water and recycled water networks or freshwater networks, a significant amount of optimization can be achieved. Detection of losses through leaking, distribution of water in areas of demand, all that can be very successfully achieved using these technologies. So, in conclusion, sustainability is a core driver in industries and communities, and we still have a significant room to develop inputs in the form of technology, financial investments, management methodologies, and regulatory frameworks. The process, mechanical, and control technology options are already are available, but there's also a great deal of room for improvement, especially to enhance the quality of the data lake, which then makes it possible for us to use these state-of-the-art analytic tools and blockchain. So data lakes and intensive recording, management, and analytical techniques will provide us opportunities for sustainability enhancement But further investment is required. And finally, it is time to think bigger and broader of all possibilities, because we have a great deal more tools available to us, both in terms of our treatment technologies, our data lake technology, our analytics, and our ability to integrate from the generator of the waste to the collector, to the treatment, to the final the fate of the waste, from a point of view of maximum recycle, minimum waste disposal, very well controlled air emissions, and safety. And the analytical tools give us, in the data lake, give us a great opportunity to predict accidents ahead before they should happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was very, very interesting, and it's great to see just exactly what you're actually doing here. Our next speaker, Sharon Sanhu. Sharon is a sustainability and environmental professional with experience in the technical delivery and management of master planning and civil infrastructure projects in the GCC and North America. Her current role, Sharon provides functional oversight for sustainability and environmental principles and plays a vital role in ensuring that Parsons services and operations are in line with Parsons' sustainability core values, client vision, and local international regulations and best practice.
Thank you to the organizers, and thank you so much to the Royal Commission of Jubail and Yanbu for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm truly honored to be here, and I've had the opportunity to also listen to some very, very interesting topics that have come before me. I only have 20 minutes, and I have a lot of content to go through, so I'm going to try my best to go as fast as I can. So the topic of my discussion today is the integration of sustainable design in cities. Mr. Gopal did touch on sustainability within cities through the lead for cities accreditation. There is quite a lot of development in terms of green building when it comes to cities as well as public realm infrastructure. So I'll start by just trying to define the problem. So half of the global population already lives in cities, and by 2050, 2/3 of the world's people are expected to live in urban areas. Cities are responsible for the consumption of 75% of the planet's natural resources, and they produce between 60 to 80% of global greenhouse emissions. Poor air and water quality and insufficient water availability, waste disposal problems, and high energy consumption are exacerbated by the increasing population density and demands of the urban environments. And strong city planning will be essential in managing these and other difficulties as the world's urban areas swell. So as you can see, it's very critical that we identify and incorporate sustainable ways of living, especially seeing as how our population is increasing exponentially. So I'll move on to define sustainable urban planning. So let's define sustainable development. Sustainable development, this is the standard definition. It is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Within the context of urban planning, sustainability aims to create resilient, healthy communities where people can live, work, and play, while protecting the natural and economic capital for the benefit of current and future generations. It embraces the principles of our circular economy through the adoption of efficient and resilient processes and technologies that promote the recycling of natural and economic capital. And it requires the input of various disciplines. It's really a collaborative approach. It requires policy, it requires planning professionals, air quality professionals, environmental professionals, financial professionals. So it's very much a collaborative approach. So now I'm just going to go through some of the best practices within sustainable urban planning. So the first step when we talk about sustainable urban planning is the protection of natural and heritage assets and pollution prevention. So this is the environmental impact assessment stage. At this stage, it's important to assess the existing environmental conditions, predict the potential impact of a project or a development on the existing conditions, and identify measures to remediate or to reduce the negative impact and to enhance the positive impacts. And typically, this is known as an environmental impact assessment. One of the outcomes of this would be the protection of natural habitat, ecology, and biodiversity. And this would be through the establishment of some of the best practices include establishment of ecological reserves and green corridors, and enhancement of local biodiversity through landscaping and other use of native and adaptive species. Environmental pollution is a big problem, and it's ever increasing, especially in cities. So a big part of the EIA process deals with reduction of emissions to soil, to water, to air. And there are a number of best available techniques which can be used for that. And I'll go through some of them in this presentation. And of course, archaeological and heritage assets. We know that Saudi Arabia has quite a few very interesting heritage assets, and it's really important at the EIA stage to identify those and to make sure that those are protected adequately. So another key concept is outdoor thermal comfort. As you know, especially in this region, when it's hot, it's very hot. So in cities, if we were going to promote sustainable transport, we normally look for non-motorized use of mobility. And that entails people basically getting outdoors and walking to places, walking to the grocery store, walking to the clinic, walking to the public parks. It's very difficult to do that when it's really hot outside. So essentially, one of the key aims, and this is in all the cities, but it's more important in this part of the world, is to reduce urban heat load. The way master planners do this is they look at basically the sun path and the wind flow, and they make sure that streets and parks and buildings are aligned in the primary prevailing wind direction. And also they look at building massing to make sure that glazing, for instance, is appropriately placed, because obviously, depending on where you are, either you want more sun or you don't want more sun to enter the building. And in this part of the world, you want to try to minimize heat loads into buildings, because that will then have an impact on the energy demand of buildings as well. In terms of passive design strategies, highly reflective pavements and surfaces are essential. So basically, materials with a solar reflective index of 29 or above are ideal, because they can reflect up to 80% of solar radiation and reduce surface temperatures by up to 20%, while reducing temperatures within buildings by up to 10 degrees Celsius. Along with that, shading pedestrian walkways, paths, and public open spaces is really important. And some of the best practices here are to shade open spaces by 60% or more, shade playgrounds by 90% or more. Pedestrian pathways should be at least 70% or more shaded. Bike paths, 50% or more. And so the intent there again is, it has been actually demonstrated that shading can reduce the perceived temperature by up to 10 degrees Celsius. Another interesting concept is the use of evaporative water features. We don't see that a lot anywhere, but these have also been demonstrated to further reduce heat within public open spaces. So it's something worth looking into as well as a technology. Okay, green walls and roofs. Green walls and roofs can increase the insulation within buildings, of buildings, and thereby reduce the energy demand. But also they look nice. Green spaces are very important also for pollution prevention and regulation of urban microclimates. And some great examples we have of green walls and roofs in Saudi Arabia are the Knowledge Park at the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture in Dhahran, which features a vertical garden home to no fewer than 15,000 plants. And also the Olaya metro station in Riyadh, which is currently under construction and will feature an iconic green roof and park. And this is going to be this is a great demonstration of how one square footage can be used for multiple purposes. So here we have a metro station, but we also have a park. So it's a public open space. Okay, public open spaces. Getting to the next point. Open spaces can serve as areas for sport and recreational activity, giving children, youth, and adults safe and healthy avenues for recreation. Providing networks of pedestrian-friendly blocks intersected by public open spaces such as parks, plazas, and squares can transform spaces into communities by providing safe areas for social interaction. And the bottom picture is from Yanbu, actually. So it's great to see so many parks within the city, and this is really a model, I have to say. Yanbu is really a model for sustainable cities. In terms of streets should be designed not only as corridors to facilitate movement of traffic, but places where people can walk, interact, and socialize, in order to facilitate a community identity. And the aim is to create safe and convenient street environments that facilitate public transport modes. So smaller blocks with more interactions are favorable to larger roads. Small blocks reduce kilometers traveled and create communities by providing opportunities for people to walk, interact, and socialize to facilitate a community identity. Grids are better than wide roads. So 4 two-lane roads they function better for both pedestrians and cars, as they provide more choices for turning and distribute traffic more evenly on streets. Typically, when we talk about provision of essential services and facilities within a reasonable and safe walking distance, we normally look at walking distance of up to 350 meters. So that's about 15 to 20 minutes of walking. That has been demonstrated to be the most efficient. And so when we talk about facilities, we're talking about parks, clinics, schools, places of worship, medical services, grocery stores. So these are the essential services that people should be able to get to by just walking. We don't want to have to use cars all the time when we don't need to. Okay, that brings us to non-motorized transport infrastructure. So non-motorized forms of transport can improve health, enhance mobility, and reduce reliance on automobiles and improve the vitality of the community. So typically what all of our green rating systems and within our practice, what we look at is increasing walkability and bikeability. But also you could also use skateboards and rollerblades and other means of getting around. So from a planning perspective, what's important is to put in place the infrastructure, right, to facilitate these modes of transportation. So in terms of bicycles, it's important to provide bicycle storage areas, shower and changing facilities within the offices and within the mainly offices, I guess, because residences already have showers, to encourage the use of non-motorized transport. It's also important to have universally accessible design, and I understand that this is already part of the local codes, but it's important to have things such as drop curbs, obviously, to ensure that people who are, who need to use wheelchairs can actually still access the pedestrian and bike paths. Right. Public transport infrastructure is really important. The intent is to reduce reliance on automobiles and GHG emissions on a mass scale. So in terms of bus and ride-hailing stops, again, the ideal situation is to have these stops within 350 meters of each other and of walking distance from building entrances. Also, it's It's preferable to place the parking lots in the back or in the side of buildings rather than in front, because if you place them in front, then it increases the walking distance to the bus stops. And improving the design of public transport stops will also help in the uptake of public transport. So, for instance, especially in this part of the world where it gets quite hot, it's useful to have, shaded or climate-controlled bus stops. And you could also incorporate other interesting conveniences, such as charging facilities and waste bins, of course. And you can incorporate solar power. If you had solar panels, those would then go towards providing the power for the charging facilities. Rail transit services, very important again. Metro stations need to be connected to retail facilities with essential retail services. Park and ride is really important. Again, giving people who have vehicles the opportunity to just park their vehicles and use the trains if they need to. Low emission transport. It's important to promote the use of low emission vehicles through infrastructure and incentives. And some of the incentives include having electric vehicle charging stations at all major parking and retail facilities, as well as preferred parking and road lanes, preferred lanes for electric, hybrid, and carpool vehicles. Another key concept is smart mobility, and it has been demonstrated autonomous or connected vehicles can lead to more efficient, safer transport, because smart mobility solutions can reduce traffic congestion and combustion and GHG emissions, improving the health and safety of the public and the environment. So some examples include basically, connected vehicles are capable of receiving intersection monitoring and alerts, providing alternative routes, basic safety messages, as well as collision prediction and warning systems. So this is, again, another concept that is gaining traction, and it's interesting to see. There are a number of pilot projects for instance, within the UAE, in Dubai, as well as other places, and it's basically demonstrated to work. Okay, so this brings me to the second concept, which is water. We've touched on water before. The intent behind water management is to encourage water-efficient public realm landscape design through plant selection, irrigation technologies, and management, and the reuse of recycled water. Sustainable landscapes have low water, power, and fertilizer requirements, and they thrive in local climates without needing extensive care. Aesthetically, they form part of the natural landscape. Examples of sustainable landscapes would include xeriscaping, which is the use of inanimate forms in landscaping, and the use of low water demand native and adaptive plant species. Smart irrigation systems are really important as well. So drip irrigation, the use of weather and soil moisture sensors and timers can significantly reduce outdoor water consumption by over 40%. Recycled water for landscaping irrigation. This is happening a lot in Yanbu, and that's great to see. So basically, this involves the use of treated sewage effluent, as well as captured grey water, and rainwater as well, but I understand that there are limitations to the use or reuse of rainwater, because it might be a little bit different in Yanbu, but in other parts of the GCC, it doesn't rain that often, and when it does, it just pours. So, having rainwater capture is a little bit of a challenge in this part of the world, also because of the high groundwater table. But essentially, so another type of recycled water is grey water, which is basically water from showers, washing machines, and faucets. So this is another concept that I don't see actually really being used a lot, and I think it has value. So it's important to try and, at the planning stage, put in place the infrastructure to enable the reuse of grey water, because I think that's one area that could be further investigated. Stormwater retention, I briefly touched on stormwater before. Retention, capture, and reuse. The intent is to maintain the hydrological regime and to reduce flood risk. So what normally happens is, in this part of the world, because a lot of the development is on the coast, the groundwater level is quite high, and therefore it is sometimes infeasible to have stormwater retention. However, there are solutions out there which could enable that to be put in place. So some of the technologies that are used are porous pavements, gravel roads, underground or above ground storage systems, as well as the use of softscaping and greenscaping, as opposed to hardscaping, because hardscaping will just lead to runoff, which then would increase flood risk as well. And it will require then a bigger network for management of the stormwater infrastructure, right? So in terms of treatment and management, that's another part of it. So when you have, when stormwater falls on the ground, it collects grease from the roads, it collects also the fertilizers from the irrigation, and all of that ends up, if it's not properly treated upstream, it'll end up in the coast, in our water, right, in our coastline. And then you end up with a polluted coastline, which will then affect the ecosystem. So it's really important that the stormwater is appropriately treated prior to final disposition. And some of the technologies, sustainable techniques that have been adopted include linear filtration systems. And these are really interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, we have a high groundwater table in this part of the world. So you could actually have linear filtration. So the runoff is filtered above ground as opposed to the traditional percolation below ground. Also, you can have fountains and waterfalls, which would aerate the water and oxygenate it and disinfect it through UV as well. Constructed wetlands are another interesting concept. You can have bioswales next to the roads. You can have floating wetlands, which is, again, very interesting, which would basically, what floating wetlands do is that it's vegetation, and there is a substrate, which actually over time builds up bacteria, and basically there's an ecosystem in the substrate that ends up treating the water as it's taken up by plants. In terms of renewable energy, it's really important to reduce the dependence on unsustainable forms of energy, and so communities need to the whole concept is to have resilient communities which are not as dependent on external methods or sources of energy. So one key concept obviously is grid integrated solar PV, and so it's possible to actually have solar panels that are connected to the grid to export through an export meter, or draw power through a power meter as needed. So you can actually sell power back to the grid when you have enough of it. And they're scalable, so they can be installed on various types of surfaces. They could be installed on rooftops of buildings, of houses, as well as car parks. Some other interesting concepts are basically piezometric pavements, which have been demonstrated to work. They're suitable for areas that have high footfall, so where you have a lot of people, around malls, for instance. What they can do is they can provide energy for small-scale use. So you could have LED light. You could have landscape lighting that is powered by the piezometric pavements. Also, again, photovoltaics and LED lights, obviously. That's another concept in lighting. I have only 5 minutes, so I have to rush through this. Okay, so this is the last topic when we talk about sustainability is material use reduction. And the intent of material use reduction is to reduce resource depletion and environmental damage due to raw material extraction, and to reduce GHG emissions due to the extraction and transport through the use of locally procured and or recycled materials. So you can do that through use of recycled steel in structures, through the use of recycled aggregates, in roads and pavements, reusing excavated materials. You can use green concrete with high percentage of recycled content, for instance, ground granulated blast furnace slag. Also industrial waste, you can reuse fly ash, bottom ash, steel slag, boiler slag, etc. And all of these, there are a number of municipalities that have actually run pilots, and they have, approved these various techniques because they are structural, they are sound. So that's another key concept. And then in terms of material management, it's really important to promote at the end of use waste, basically recycling. So waste reduction and recycling. Obviously, it's better to have waste segregation at source. If the facilities do not exist to recycle waste or to sort waste. So that is something that's used around the world. It is really a matter of public perception, and it really is about changing people's mindsets and making them understand the importance of recycling, because it really relies on people. If you put the infrastructure in place and people don't use it, then it's not going to be, at the end of the day, it's not going to be a success. And finally, like I mentioned, provision of waste bins through regular intervals in streets, parks, and open spaces is important. And there are a few interesting concepts here as well. Instead of the usual truck, having above-ground storage bins and having truck collection, you can actually bury the waste storage systems within the public realm. So you can have underground waste storage, and you can actually even have vacuum or pneumatic waste transfer systems. So these are two alternatives to having the traditional trucked collection. And the benefits of these are to reduce pestilence, because it's basically healthier. You also increase the amount of space above ground. Of course, you need to have the relevant sort of utility corridor to put these in, but they have been proven to work again. And the intent here is to have a clean city which is free of litter. So with this, I will end. I think I managed to keep within the 20 minutes, and I know there was a lot of information. So I want to thank you for your time today.
Sharon, thank you very much for that. That was very informative. That's the end of our session. I'm not sure if we have time for question and answers. Do we have time for question and answers? Do we have time for question and answers? Yes? Okay. I think we've 5 minutes for question and answers, so if we could have any questions from the floor, please. Oh, right. Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Very nice presentations. Actually, I have two questions, one shared between Sharon and Amin, and one for green building. Amin, really very good presentation, share with your experience. But when you say minimize the waste, today we have challenges. I mean, some waste I know it is difficult to be reused again. And I'm sure I have seen Sharon in the last presentation. She listed many good recommendations, but practically it is very difficult. When I was in SABIC, we have a slag. We did a lot of work, research. After that, we convinced the stakeholders. Today, the question, the small industries cannot do that. What is the good direction people can utilize that? This is number one. Number two, Sharon, you mentioned a lot of things. Royal Commission or consultant need a roadmap or guidelines. Otherwise, we like somebody shoot the ball in the dark. Can you help us? What is it? For the green building, I mean, today also, if you go to Royal Commission or industries, there is a CT40, there is a sustainable city, there is the lead for city. I think we are now many programs in place. And unless the people like to documentation something else, in the end of the day, there is no result. I still believe lead is good for building, full stop. and we can leave the city as sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hazmi. You raise a very important question because clearly there are some wastes that are very difficult to treat. And the way we would approach that, we have three options. One is to see if we can evaluate more pre-treatment options in order to take away the refractory nature of the waste and thus make it treatable. If that is not possible, then the second option is to work with the waste generator, where you look upstream to see whether the waste stream could have been broken into smaller elements, which as separate individual elements, they are easier to handle, but when they come together, they are very difficult. We did, this is not a difficult waste, but we did some work with Coca-Cola many years ago, where they wanted to optimize their water consumption. And they used to put together all their wastewater streams in one big tank and then have a problem on how to treat it because it was very high COD. But the study showed that during the manufacturing process, if you took streams off at certain strategic points, the net really bad material that you had to treat could be reduced by almost 70–75%. So the second option is to work with the generator to see if we can improve treatability. And then I think the third option obviously is to find the safest route for disposal, which does not add too many new materials to that waste as a result of increasing the volumes for disposal. So those are the three suggestions I would have.
With respect to, I believe your question had to do with the uptake of recycling technologies. I didn't quite. Yes.
Can you support them as a question?
Yes, definitely. So it depends. Normally, it depends on the. It all starts with the vision. So the first step is, of course, to understand what the vision is for the Royal Commission of Jubail and Yanbu. And once that vision is further defined, then you can start looking at the strategies and put in place a roadmap. So there are various, as we mentioned earlier, Mr. Gopal talked about LEED, and LEED is one of the certification systems. There are municipalities that are coming up with their own as well. For instance, in Abu Dhabi, you have the Esidama, and Esidama has developed not only the Pearl Building Rating System, but they now have a Pearl Community Rating System, which is for communities and basically for cities. By communities, it's basically there's a minimum density that they consider. But then they also have come up with a public realm rating system, which is for the public realm infrastructure, which is not only limited to communities. So the field is really developing and it's advancing at a rapid pace. And I believe it's important to look at all the best practices and then to decide whether you wish to adopt a rating system that has already been developed or develop a bespoke system that is applicable to that particular community.
I'll just rush because I think I just got a minute. So Dr. Azmi, first of all, thank you for the question. So very strangely, LEED over the last 25 years, I talked about some 20 billion square feet. 20% of it were actually large campuses. I'll give you an example. Now, if you talk about KFD in Riyadh, it is a microcosm of a city. So you have buildings inside, you have a mosque, you have a metro station. Now all that today, we've been working with LEED over the last 3 years. So the answer to your question is, we're already working with mini cities. And there's a lot of demand. People like Yanbu, Jubail, they came to us and said, we are having all the strategies, but we need an independent link to understand whether we are on the right track. And I talked about the technology platform. So What we are saying is, I think as Sandhu also said, we are moving away from, it can be Estidama, it can be 5-star in China, it can be anything. What we are telling the world is, use a technology platform which is agnostic to ratings, and then see where the cities are and take steps to become sustainable. So possibly I'll connect with you offline because of paucity of time. But the point here is we're already working with cities, and we just extended that. That's it. Thank you.
Folks, thank you very much. Thank you, speakers. That was very, very interesting. Thank you for the question. We look forward to seeing you after lunch.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator and the dear panelists. We'll take a break for about 25 minutes to perform the Dhuhr prayer and also coffee break as well. And we shall be back at 12:30 for the second session. Thank you very much. Looking forward to see you in 25 minutes.
How are you keeping? Good. Are you back in Abu Dhabi?